Hey friends, it's Jimmy here as usual, welcoming you to another episode in my Unsolved Mysteries series. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell, and leave a comment saying where you're watching from. It was a festive December night in 1986, and the crew of a British ship packed the lively bars of Gibraltar while on shore leave. Among them was 18-year-old Simon Parks, a radio operator from Bristol. By the next morning, Simon had vanished without a trace and never returned to his ship. His mysterious disappearance that night sparked a decades-long international search for answers. Parks was serving aboard the aircraft carrier Illustrious, which docked in Gibraltar on December 12, 1986. They visited the Horseshoe Bar on Main Street, and around midnight Parks told friends he was going to get some food before heading back. One witness later claimed to have seen someone matching Parks's description at another pub not long after, appearing unsteady on his feet. Beyond that possible sighting, there were no further clues, and he never returned to the ship. When Illustrious sailed home without him a few days later, a massive search by military and local police had failed to find any trace of the missing sailor. Authorities initially treated Simon's disappearance as a possible AWOL case rather than a presumed death. However, evidence soon showed Simon hadn't planned to vanish. He left all his personal belongings behind on the ship, including his passport and Christmas gifts he had bought. He had told his family he'd be home for the holidays, and even arranged for his parents to greet Illustrious when it returned to port. These facts made it clear his disappearance was not voluntary. Despite a 250-man search around the area where he was last seen, no clues turned up. With no leads to follow, the trail grew cold as weeks turned into years. For over 15 years, Simon Parks's fate remained a mystery. Then, in 2001, a disturbing lead emerged. Former Royal Navy Petty Officer Alan Grimson was convicted of slaying two young men. Investigators noted an eerie detail. Both of Grimson's known victims had been killed on December 12th, the same date that Simon had vanished. Grimson had served on Illustrious and was in Gibraltar with Parks back in 1986. This coincidence elevated him to a prime suspect in Simon's case. Some authorities even speculated that, given Grimson's December 12th pattern, he might have had other unidentified victims. Reports later surfaced that witnesses placed Grimson and Parks together on the night of the disappearance, intensifying suspicions. With Grimson in mind as a suspect, British authorities renewed the search for Simon in the early 2000s. In 2003, Hampshire police investigators traveled to Gibraltar and conducted fresh searches for any trace of Parks. Forensic teams with cadaver dogs scoured multiple sites, even checking sewers for hidden remains. Despite this extensive effort, nothing was found to shed light on Simon's fate. This flurry of intense interest in the case rapidly cooled in light of the lack of any additional findings. In late 2019, a former shipmate of Parks provided information suggesting Simon's body might be in Trafalgar Cemetery. This is a graveyard in central Gibraltar, not far from the pub where he was last seen. Police spent a week excavating the cemetery grounds in search of evidence. They did uncover some bone fragments in an unusual spot, but after forensic analysis, these proved to be non-human remains. Once again, the trail went cold. Further searches were conducted in the following years. In 2020, authorities explored additional sites in Gibraltar based on ongoing inquiries, but found nothing of significance. Then in August 2023, acting on another tip, police excavated part of a parking lot. For 4 days, teams dug up concrete and even inspected old water tanks beneath the site. As with previous efforts, this operation ended in disappointment. No trace of Simon was found. With that, investigators were left without answers yet again. Through all these twists and turns, Simon Parks's family has endured a long wait for answers. In late 2025, nearly 40 years after Simon vanished, police officially announced that they had exhausted all reasonable lines of inquiry. As of now, the case has been effectively closed unless new information comes to light. There's a silent, high-end hotel room in the heart of Bangkok, where the only movement is the slow rotation of a ceiling fan. A world-famous martial arts icon and actor is found in the dark shadows of a closet. He's bound in a way that defies simple explanation and shatters the peaceful persona he spent a lifetime cultivating. David Carradine's departure from this world on June 4th, 2009, was a morbid puzzle that pitted international forensic experts against local police. He was 72 years old and experiencing a major career resurgence when he was discovered by a cleaner that fateful day. David Carradine was the cornerstone of a massive Hollywood acting dynasty, the eldest son of the legendary John Carradine. His path was almost predestined, though he fought to establish his own identity, even changing his name from John Carradine Jr. to David. While he appeared in over 200 roles, he was forever cemented in the public consciousness as Kwai Chang Caine from the series Kung Fu. Ironically, he had no martial arts experience when he started that role, yet he became a global symbol of Eastern wisdom and disciplined strength. Later in life, Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill series gave him a second act as a formidable villain, proving his talent hadn't faded with age. And personally, this is where I know him from, having never seen anything from any of the iterations of the Kung Fu series. The actor arrived in Thailand in late May 2009 to work on a sports film titled Stretch. By all accounts, he was in high spirits, frequently serenading guests and staff on the hotel's grand piano in the days leading up to his death. He'd even made a reservation for a group dinner on the very night he'd eventually be found. However, when he didn't show up for a meal with the film crew on Wednesday, concern began to mount. The following morning, a maid entered suite 352 and found him in a sitting position inside a closet. He was naked, wearing a black wig and a gag, with ropes tied around his neck and other body parts. His hands were tied above his head, fastened to the clothing rack. Initial reports from the Thai authorities suggested he'd made a conscious choice to end his own life. This theory was quickly challenged by his family and manager, who insisted he was far too happy and professionally satisfied to take such an action. Further, many publicly questioned why he would have chosen to present himself that way if he knew what he was going to do and that he was going to be found. There was no note, and the room showed no signs of a struggle or a break-in. Hallway security cameras confirmed that no one else had entered his suite after he returned on Wednesday night, which only deepened the mystery of how such a complex scene came to be. Because of the conflicting accounts, the family hired famed forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden to conduct a second autopsy once the body reached Los Angeles. Baden's findings were pivotal. He identified the cause of death as asphyxiation or an inability to breathe, but he specifically dismissed the possibility of a self-inflicted end. He noted that the nature of the ligatures around the body made it extremely unlikely that this was an intentional act. Instead, the evidence pointed toward a tragic accident. The physical mechanics of the event suggested that the pressure on the respiratory system wasn't applied by a traditional drop, but through a gradual restriction of oxygen. Thai forensic experts, including the country's top criminalist, suggested that the scene was consistent with a dangerous form of activity. This practice involves temporarily cutting off oxygen, a gamble that can quickly turn fatal if the practitioner loses consciousness and can't release the pressure. The complex system of ropes found on his body, including those from the hotel curtains, pointed toward a practiced but ultimately disastrous ritual. Despite the forensic leanings toward an accident, several more sinister theories emerged. The family's attorney, Mark Garagos, publicly speculated that his client might have been slain by a secret society. This theory claimed that his deep interest in investigating and disclosing the activities of secret martial arts organizations had put him in the crosshairs of dangerous groups. Supporters of this idea noted that his hands were tied in a way that seemed difficult for a 72-year-old man to manage alone. However, investigators countered that there were no signs of another person's presence in the room, nor was there any evidence of a shadowy network of martial artists. Another more grounded theory suggested that, while he wasn't targeted by assassins, he might not have been alone during the act. Some argued that a companion might have been present to assist with the restraints, but panicked when he stopped breathing and fled the hotel to avoid a scandal. However, official reports from the Royal Thai Police maintained that the room was secure and that the actor was the only one involved. Adding weight to the accidental theory were the statements from his former wives. His fourth wife, Marina Anderson, had stated years before in divorce documents that he practiced potentially deadly behaviors. Another ex-wife, Gail Jensen, mentioned his fascination with ropes, though she described it more as a form of intense meditation. These insights into his private world provided a context that the public hadn't seen, suggesting that the scene in Bangkok was the tragic final iteration of a lifelong secret. The family sought FBI assistance because they were dissatisfied with the transparency of the Thai investigation and the leaking of sensitive crime scene photos to local tabloids. While the FBI observed the process, they didn't have the jurisdiction to take over the case. The Thai authorities eventually closed the case as an accidental death, a finding that Dr. Bodden's independent autopsy supported in terms of the medical cause. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like and share this video if you're enjoying it, and to hit the notification bell. Also, don't forget to check out the Patreon or the YouTube membership to take your support for my channel to the next level. Imagine standing on a dusty platform in Pretoria during June 1900, while the distant thud of British artillery rattles your teeth and coal smoke from a locomotive chokes the air. You watch as frantic officials heave heavy wooden crates into a baggage car, knowing it's the last chance to save the lifeblood of a dying nation from the greatest empire on earth. Those boxes were reportedly filled with gold bars, raw bullion, and thousands of coins. As that train pulled away into the sunset, it carried a secret that would spark a century of obsession and high-stakes detective work across the globe. To understand why this legend refuses to die, we've got to look at the ground beneath the Boer's feet. In 1886, everything changed for the South African Republic when gold was found at Langlot. This massive discovery turned a struggling farming community into the world's gold capital almost overnight, attracting thousands of desperate seekers. This wealth brought thousands of foreigners, called the Uitlanders by the Afrikaners, who the Boers saw as a threat to their sovereignty and traditional agrarian lifestyle. The British Empire needed gold to back its global currency, leading to tensions that exploded into the Second Boer War in 1899. President Paul Kruger established a national mint in 1892 that eventually processed a vast quantity of the entire world's gold. As the clouds of conflict gathered, the government took several preventative measures by banning gold exports and commandeering coins from private banks to build a substantial war chest. By May 1900, British forces were at the gates of Pretoria, and the situation became dire for the Republic's leadership. Kruger left the capital by train on May 29th, but the gold stayed behind for a final frantic evacuation. On June 4th, Just hours before the city fell to the advancing troops, Attorney General Jan Smuts arrived at the mint to empty the vaults. It's hard to overstate how chaotic those final hours were for the Republic's leaders and the bank officials involved. Witnesses described seeing wagons filled with wooden boxes being rushed from the mint to the train station, while British cannons echoed nearby. Smuts met with the head of the mint, Jules Perrin, and the National Bank manager to ensure every bit of gold was weighed and recorded before it was sent away. That last train steamed out that afternoon on the Delagoa Bay Railway, which was the only line still under Boer control. When the British occupied Pretoria the next day, Lord Alfred Milner's audit found over £1.5 million missing from the National Treasury. To put this in context, in present-day value, this was over $100 billion worth of gold. That missing wealth is the foundation of the legend of the Kruger millions, fueling countless expeditions into the wilderness. The British were convinced the Boers had hidden a massive stash in the rugged interior of the country to fund future resistance. As the conflict shifted into a brutal guerrilla phase, the Boer commandos desperately needed money for supplies and international weapons purchases. The most popular theory is that the treasure was buried in the Lowveld, specifically near the Blyde River Canyon. The legend says a select group of soldiers buried the gold in a secret location, but didn't survive the conflict to reveal the spot. One dark account comes from a man named John Holtzhausen, who made a startling confession in 1905 while in prison. He claimed he was hired to bury gold and diamonds worth £2 million during the retreat. He told a story of stumbling across a skeleton with gold bars, which led to a betrayal in the bush. Holtzhausen's companion, Philip Schwartz, allegedly slew his partners to keep the location a secret for himself. Schwartz was eventually executed for another crime, taking the treasure's location to his grave and ending the official search. While the buried treasure stories get the headlines, there's a more grounded theory that the millions were moved to Europe by Willem Leids. Leids was Kruger's diplomat and managed the Republic's financial assets in several European courts. In May 1900, a ship left for the Netherlands, carrying over 13,000 pounds of gold from southern Africa. While this is far from the 1.5 million pounds that were missing from the treasury, it suggests an organized movement of this gold wealth out of the nation. Some scholars have proposed that this was just one of many such ships that transferred gold to Europe. Upon arrival, according to the theory, the Boer gold was transferred to Switzerland, where the wealth was subsequently plundered by government officials. This version suggests the money wasn't lost to the earth, but laundered through the emerging global financial system for personal gain. The mystery took a wild turn in 2021 when a collection of over 900 gold coins was found in a Swiss vault. These coins were produced between 1893 and 1900 and were stored in the Netherlands before being moved to Switzerland sometime in the 1930s. The South African Mint eventually bought the collection at auction and brought the coins home to sell to local collectors. While these coins haven't been officially tied to the Kruger millions mystery, it lines up with the theory that the gold was brought to Europe and hidden away. In the end, it remains unclear whether there's truly a missing hoard of gold somewhere in South Africa or hidden in a Swiss vault, or whether the majority of the wealth was used to fund the war. On a cold December afternoon in 1992, 23-year-old Stephen Clark walked into a public washroom by the seaside and was never seen again. The quaint coastal village of Marske by the Sea in northern England would become the center of a decades-long mystery after Stephen vanished without a trace. What began as a routine holiday walk with his mother turned into one of the UK's most perplexing missing person cases. Over 30 years later, Stephen's fate remains unknown, leaving his family and an entire community desperate for answers. Stephen Clark was born in 1969 and grew up in a loving family alongside his parents, Doris and Charles, and a younger sister, Victoria. As a child, he survived a terrible accident where he was struck by a vehicle, an event that left him with serious injuries to his left arm and leg. The damage was permanent. Stephen's left arm was largely unusable, and he walked with a pronounced limp for the rest of his life. Despite the challenges stemming from his childhood injuries, Stephen was determined to build an independent life. In his late teens, his family had spent several years in South Africa before returning to England in 1990, eventually settling in Marsk by the sea. Eager to improve his prospects, he enrolled in a training program with an organization supporting people with disabilities in developing job skills. During this time, Stephen also began dating a young woman he met through the program. He grew close enough to be invited to her home to meet her parents, a sign that the relationship was becoming meaningful. By the winter of 1992, it seemed that Stephen was on the verge of big things in both his personal and professional life. As Christmas came and went that year, none of his loved ones could have imagined that Stephen's promising life was about to take a tragic turn. The incident occurred on Monday, December 28, 1992, just after Christmas. Stephen and his mother Doris decided to take an afternoon walk along the beach from their village of Marsk to the nearby town of Saltburn by the sea. The seaside promenade was a familiar spot and an easy outing for the 23-year-old and his mom. At approximately 3 o'clock that afternoon, as they strolled near Saltburn's pier, Stephen told his mother he needed to use the washroom. He headed for the public toilet while Doris went into the adjacent ladies' facilities at the same time. That brief moment, a mother and son entering separate bathrooms, would be the last time Doris ever saw her son. Stephen had vanished in a matter of minutes, in a busy area, with no witnesses whatsoever. Alarmed and confused, Doris searched the immediate area but found no sign of Stephen. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. When he failed to turn up, Stephen's family contacted police to report him missing. The initial search for Stephen focused on the coastline and town where he was last seen. Given the proximity to the sea, there was concern he might have had an accident, perhaps fallen from the nearby pier or cliffs, or been caught by the tide. However, extensive searches of the shoreline and surrounding area turned up nothing. No clothing, no clues, and, most importantly, no body was ever found. Stephen seemed to have disappeared without a trace, leaving behind countless unanswered questions. Adding to the mystery, it was later noted that Stephen had left some personal items back home that day, including his wallet, watch, and glasses. These are items he would almost certainly need if he planned on going anywhere for long. These possessions sitting untouched in his bedroom suggested that he fully expected to return home shortly, a return that never happened. For years, the last confirmed sighting of Stephen remained that fateful moment at the Saltburn public toilets. His family was left in limbo, and Doris and Charles insisted their son was happy and had no reason to run away. The idea that he might have done something or simply left to start a new life didn't square with his personality or circumstances. Stephen had been looking forward to things like a potential job opportunity and his budding romance, making a voluntary disappearance seem improbable. Still, without any evidence of foul play, police initially treated the case as a missing person inquiry. The trail in Saltburn went cold, and as the 1990s progressed, Stephen's case languished with no breakthroughs. Then, in 2020, this long-dormant case was suddenly thrust back into the spotlight. The cold case unit took a fresh look at the file and uncovered new information that raised disturbing possibilities. In particular, detectives revealed that a potential witness had come forward with a significant new sighting. A woman reported seeing a man she believed to be Stephen near the Clark family's home in Marsk on the very day he went missing. She recalled this as being sometime between 3 and 4 that afternoon on December 28th, 1992. And yeah, that's quite a memory on her, recalling the exact time and date she saw someone almost 30 years ago. I can't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. But to spoil what happens next, this is going to be part of the basis for charging the parents, but I'll come to that. If accurate, this sighting meant that Stephen did make it back from Saltburn that afternoon. This would contradict the long-held assumption that whatever happened to him occurred at the seaside toilets. Police stated that they found the report credible and now believe Stephen was alive and in the vicinity of his home during that hour on the day he vanished. This revelation shifted the focus of the investigation dramatically and hinted that the original timeline of events might be incomplete. Even more startling was an old clue resurrected from the past. Back in 1999, 7 years after Stephen disappeared, an anonymous letter had been mailed to the local police station. The unsigned letter claimed that Stephen Clark was dead, and even named a specific person responsible for his death. At the time, officers had logged the letter and discussed its contents with Stephen's family, but with no corroborating evidence, the lead went nowhere and faded into obscurity. Now, with the case reopened, detectives made a public appeal in 2020 for the mystery letter writer to come forward. In a surprising turn, the author of the letter did come forward after that appeal and spoke with police as part of the investigation. Authorities haven't disclosed what was learned, but the letter's emergence was one of several factors that convinced investigators something criminal might have happened to Stephen. By late 2020, the Cold Case Review had gathered enough evidence and suspicion for the authorities to take drastic action. Citing the total absence of any proof of life for nearly 30 years, detectives formally declared that Stephen was likely slain. But then things took a very dramatic and unexpected turn. In September 2020, in a bombshell development that made national headlines in the UK, Stephen's elderly parents, Doris and Charles Clark, were arrested for the crime. The notion that his own mother and father, now in their late 70s, could be implicated in Stephen's fate shocked those who knew the close-knit family. Police spent days searching the Clark home, digging up sections of the yard and combing through decades-old belongings for any hidden evidence. The investigation into Stephen's relationships and last known activities took on new urgency as detectives tried to determine if there had been foul play from within the household. After months of scrutiny, however, the case against Doris and Charles didn't materialize. In early 2021, the Crown Prosecution Service announced no charges would be filed due to insufficient evidence. The Clarks were fully cleared and released, and ultimately it remains unclear why the authorities figured that this would be an appropriate charge in the circumstances. Both parents vehemently maintained their innocence throughout, calling the ordeal horrendous, and professing that they had no idea what happened to Stephen. In fact, in the wake of their arrest, the couple took the unusual step of inviting a television documentary crew into their lives. They hoped that this would both clear their names and also raise the profile of their son's case. They may have also been hoping to put some serious pressure on the authorities to actually crack the case given the spectacle that was created with the arrest. However, by the end of 2021, the active investigation wound down again with no arrests, no answers, and a cloud of suspicion dispelled, but not fully understood. Over the years, Stephen Clark's case has spawned many theories, each troubling in its own way, and none supported by definitive evidence. One early theory was that Stephen might have suffered an accident by the sea. such as slipping on ice or being swept away by waves near the pier. However, an extensive search never found any trace of him along the coast, and the geography of the region isn't particularly treacherous. Another possibility raised was that Stephen chose to disappear intentionally, perhaps to start a new life. Yet those close to him argue this is out of character, and Stephen left behind his essential belongings and also was looking forward to upcoming opportunities. This makes it hard to believe he would simply walk away forever, especially since he seems to have been so excited about his new girlfriend and the potential future with her. There's also the grim scenario of a random attacker or abduction. No witnesses have ever come forward to suggest an attack in that busy area, and Stephen, at 6 feet 3 inches, isn't the sort of person predators generally choose to target. Even though he had a visible physical disability due to the accident, he would have still been able to give a hell of a fight. The most persistent theory, and the one pursued by police in 2020, is that foul play by someone close to Stephen led to his disappearance. Investigators scrutinize Stephen's inner circle, including family, because statistically, a person is often harmed by someone they know. The anonymous letter from 1999 had explicitly pointed to an unnamed individual's involvement, implying that Stephen was slain and the truth covered up. Ultimately, however, at present, all we can say is that his parents have been investigated thoroughly and cleared. As of today, the disappearance of Stephen Clark remains an agonizing, unsolved mystery. It's now been more than 3 decades since that December day, and Stephen's 53rd birthday has come and gone with no answers. His story continues to haunt the community of Marsk by the Sea, where by all accounts he was a familiar and well-liked figure. His parents, against all hope, have publicly stated that they continue to hope that one day he'll simply just walk through the door once again. Imagine walking alone on a misty mountain path in rural Japan. All is quiet until a strange, hunched figure emerges from the trees. Before you can even cry out, the creature speaks, and it's your voice, uttering the very thought that was forming in your mind. Such is the unnerving encounter with the Satori, a mysterious being of Japanese folklore said to read minds. In Japanese lore, the Satori is described as a monkey-like supernatural creature that dwells in remote mountain regions. Travelers trekking along lonely mountain paths or woodcutters working at isolated forest huts may encounter a Satori suddenly appearing on the trail. With its hunched, hairy form and unnervingly keen eyes, the creature's mere appearance is frightening, yet the Satori's most dreaded ability is even more unsettling. The hallmark of a Satori is its telepathic power to read human thoughts. It will instantly speak a person's thoughts aloud, often finishing your sentences before you do. This means the creature can anticipate every action. If you plan to run or to strike it, the Satori already knows, making it nearly impossible to catch by surprise. This psychological terror of having one's private thoughts exposed by a monster makes the Satori especially feared. Beyond its mind reading, the Satori is also known as a dangerous predator. Legends claim it will hunt humans for sport. However, folklore offers a clever defense against this menace. If a person can manage to do something truly unexpected, an action with no premeditation, it might startle the Satori and send it fleeing in fear. Better yet, the surefire way to survive a Satori encounter is to empty one's mind completely. With no thoughts to read, the mind-reading monster becomes confused or bored, and eventually wanders off. Of course, achieving such a zen-like state of no mind while facing a hungry cryptid is easier said than done, which is why most victims in the tales are not so lucky. The Satori's very name hints at its eerie role. In Japanese, Satori refers to sudden enlightenment, an ironic title for a wild mountain monster. Even the prescribed escape from a Satori, clearing one's mind entirely, mirrors Zen Buddhist practices of attaining inner stillness. In this way, the Satori legend doubles as a folk cautionary tale and a subtle spiritual lesson about the power of the ability to empty one's mind. Historically, the Satori entered written folklore during the Edo period, with the first documented recording of the creature coming in a 1712 encyclopedia. Folklorists have offered various interpretations of what the Satori really represents. One theory is that it started out as a mountain kami, a minor deity or spirit of the wild, that devolved into a yokai as people lost faith in the old nature gods. Another theory is that the creature grew out of a previous ghostly entity, which was said to haunt mountains and echo words back. For clarity's sake, a yokai is a supernatural entity from Japanese folklore, often described as spirits, demons, strange apparitions, or in modern times, as cryptids. They embody the mysterious, eerie, and sometimes playful aspects of the unseen world. Many interpretations of this creature are interwoven with Zen Buddhist lessons, and the stories may not be intended to be taken at face value. One of the most famous Satori legends tells of a lone woodcutter deep in the mountains who is stalked by the creature. Every time the woodcutter conceives a plan, whether to flee or to swing his axe, the Satori speaks his thought aloud in a mocking voice, thwarting any chance of surprise. Finally, in desperation, the man stops scheming and simply resumes chopping wood, trying to empty his mind. While he chops the wood, eventually the axe head breaks off and flies into the Satori, eliminating the ape creature on the spot. The tale's implicit moral is that only a truly empty mind can outwit the mind-reading Satori, mirroring the Zen teaching that stillness of mind can overcome even great obstacles. Folk traditions are generally less high-minded and simply focus on the fact that the Satori wouldn't harm those who live and work respectfully in the mountains. In these stories, the creature preys mainly on outsiders or people who look to exploit the mountain's riches, almost like a guardian spirit of the highlands, enforcing nature's rules. While the Satori is now largely regarded solely as a mythical being, this creature was once accepted as part of the order of the natural world. Interestingly, some have tried to tie the Satori to the case of the Hibagon, an ape-like cryptid which was reported in Japan in the 1970s. Notably, though, aside from both being ape-like creatures residing in the mountains, the two really have nothing in common at all. On a cold December afternoon in 1985, shoppers at a Kmart in Spanaway, Washington, found a distressed 2-year-old girl wandering alone in the parking lot. She was shivering in only a t-shirt and diaper, and her parents were nowhere in sight. When police gently asked the toddler where her mother was, the only clue she gave was a haunting reply that her mommy was, quote, in the trees. The crimes of 1985, later dubbed the Tube Sock Killings, remain a chilling mystery to this day. The mystery began months earlier, in the summer of 1985, with a weekend camping trip that ended in tragedy. On August 10th, 1985, 42-year-old Ruth Cooper and her boyfriend, 27-year-old Stephen Harkins, left Tacoma for a quiet camping getaway. They went to Tule Lake in the foothills near Mineral, Washington, expecting a routine weekend trip. When they failed to return to work the following Monday, their families grew concerned and reported them missing. 4 days later, on August 14th, hikers in a remote wooded area came upon a disturbing scene. Stephen Harkins was found shot to death, still zipped in his sleeping bag, as if ambushed while he slept. Nearby, the couple's dog was also found shot. There was no sign of Ruth, leading searchers to conclude she had also fallen victim to whoever committed these sick acts. 2 months passed with no answers. Then, on October 26, 1985, a human skull was discovered about a mile and a half from the campsite. Dental records confirmed it belonged to Ruth Cooper, and 2 days later her skeletal remains were found about 50 feet from that spot. In a grim detail that became central to the case's infamy, a white tube sock was tied around Ruth's neck. The autopsy determined she had most likely been cut down by a gunshot wound to the abdomen. This baffling clue, the tube sock, offered no immediate explanation, but it set the Cooper-Harkins case apart instantly. 2 months later, on December 12, 1985, another couple ventured into the woods near Tacoma. That morning, 36-year-old Mike Reamer, his 21-year-old girlfriend Diana Robertson, and their 2-year-old daughter Crystal drove out to chop down a Christmas tree. Later that day, little Crystal was found wandering alone outside a Kmart in Spanaway. She was placed in temporary care until her grandmother recognized her after seeing a news report a few days later. Once reunited with family, Crystal repeated her ominous line about her mother being in the trees, but being only 2 years old, she couldn't say anything more. Authorities launched a massive search of the woods where Mike and Diana had gone, but no trace of the couple or their red pickup truck was found. For over 2 months, Crystal's parents' fate remained an unsolved mystery. Then, on February 18, 1986, a motorist on a remote logging road near Mineral spotted Mike's abandoned pickup truck partly buried in snow. Nearby, lying in the woods, was the body of Diana Robertson. The autopsy showed that she had been stabbed, and around her neck there was yet another tube sock, just like with Ruth Cooper. Inside the truck, police found blood on the seat and a manila envelope on the dashboard with a handwritten message reading, "I love you, Diana." But Mike Reamer had vanished, and even after the snow melted, no sign of him could be found. With the discovery of Diana's body, detectives realized the earlier campsite killings were likely connected. In both cases, a female victim was found with a white tube sock tied around her neck in the same unusual way. Investigators believed the predator brought these socks to the scenes, since they didn't belong to the victims. The crimes took place in remote forest locations and targeted outdoorsy couples, suggesting a single perpetrator with a frightening modus operandi. However, linking the cases by this clue did not reveal the serial killer's identity. The isolated wilderness crime scenes yielded few other clues, and in 1985, forensic tools like DNA profiling weren't yet available to assist. Police initially pursued two theories. Either an unknown serial killer was stalking young couples in the Washington woods, or Mike Reamer himself was behind the attacks. Under the latter theory, they believed that the first set of slayings may have been a smokescreen or a dry run for the attack on his girlfriend. With Mike missing, he naturally became the prime suspect, and disturbingly, he had a history of violence towards Diana. The cryptic note in the truck also raised suspicion as a possible farewell message if Mike had killed her and fled, though it could have been left by someone else to mislead investigators. They also found it suspicious that the sick puppy who committed these terrible acts spared Crystal. Police felt they had enough evidence against Mike, but since he was missing, they could not determine if he was even alive to face charges. Police and volunteers combed the woods and rivers for any sign of Mike for weeks, but no trace of him turned up. With no body and no new leads, the investigation eventually stalled. In the end, no other suspect emerged, and the predator remained at large. Mike's family vigorously denied that he could have been involved, stating that he wasn't a violent guy, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Years passed, and the tube sock killings case stayed unsolved. In 1989, it was featured on Unsolved Mysteries, bringing national attention, but no breakthroughs followed. A major development finally came in 2011 when a hiker stumbled upon a partial human skull about a mile from where Diana's body had been found. Dental records identified it as Mike Reimers. This grim discovery confirmed Mike had died in the woods as well, but it didn't reveal whether he was a victim or the culprit. His partial skull showed no bullet wound, and authorities couldn't determine how he died or when. Unfortunately, this did little to prove whether he was the perpetrator or yet another victim of an unknown serial offender. Cold case detectives later revisited the case with modern forensics, attempting to see if Mike was responsible. Unfortunately, these results were never released to the public, and the case remains officially open. To me, these two factors suggest that Mike likely wasn't responsible, though the genetic evidence could have been too degraded to take a meaningful sample at the time. Unfortunately, as of now, it appears that the sick predator responsible for these four acts may still walk amongst us.